From the Rogue Word Studio in Dallas, Texas, it's The Lit Show with Jeremy Fee. New episode each Tuesday. Authors welcome, comments encouraged. Hello everyone, welcome to The Lit Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Fee. As always, I've got something special for you today. I'm really excited to give you the book battle for the end of the year. But first, I've got an idea, and I would love to hear your feedback on it. I thought, why not do a best read of the decade for all the 10 years in the 2020s. And in order to do that, I need to officially declare my best read of 2020 before we do the actual battle for 2021. I hope you like the idea. Starting with 2020, let's look back and see what I read. So I'm not going to do the full book battle where I do round by round, part by part, but I'm putting up on the screen the prelims books. I looked back at the months and what I was reading to get the 12 books and the 4 wild cards. And the 4 wild cards are books that I really like in addition to the 12 books that were the best reads for those months. And you will see the books that advance from the prelims up to quarterfinals. All really good books. I would recommend them all. And then we get to the semifinals where I love looking at the last 4, the top 4 reads for the month. We've got The Kite Runner, which is amazing literature. We've got Dry by Neil Shusterman. I highly recommend it. Deals with the idea of the water crisis in the future. It's really amazing to see how people react in that emergency situation. It helped me as a read during the pandemic. It was very good psychologically, I think, to help process things. We've also got Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. That was such a great read in 2020. And Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. Now, 2 of these 4 books, Kite Runner and Murder on the Orient Express, there are movies that you can watch for them. Because after I read the book, I have a lot of fun watching the movie. But let's go ahead and see what advances to finals. It's The Kite Runner and Name of the Wind. Murder on the Orient Express almost made it to the finals. These are some close calls, as we'll have, I'm sure, after this. Looking at these 2 amazing reads, I kind of want to just declare a tie, but I'm not going to do that. The best read of 2020 was The Kite Runner. Such a powerful, emotional story, which may bring you to tears when you read it, or if you watch the movie. My best read of 2020 was The Kite Runner. Let's go ahead and put that in the best reads of the decade so that it's down there in prelims so that you can see it. May be alone right now, but by the end of this video, we're going to have 1 more book added to that little chart. Oh, so here's the moment we've all been waiting for, right? Let's do it. The big tournament, the best read of 2021. I don't know how I'm going to get through this, but I greatly appreciate your support. All the comments, clicking the like button, subscribing to the channel. It makes a huge difference for me. I appreciate that you do it. Feel free to put your comments down below of what books that you're rooting for in the tournament, how you feel about how it went, what book you might have chosen differently from what I pick as we continue. So as the year started out in January, I could tell for January and February, I was really focused on characters that I liked. January, I chose as my best read from the graphic novels for the TV show The Blacklist. It's got Raymond Reddington. He's one of my all-time favorite characters. He's such a fun character. And then in February, I chose a Star Trek book written by Una McCormick because it had Mr. Garrick on Cardassia, involved in politics and intrigue, and that's another one of my all-time favorite characters. We then move on to March, where I was shocked when I read The Bewilderness by Ben Reeves. It is such a spectacular novel. It's really a novella, part of a fantasy series. He hasn't finished the series yet, so the only drawback would be, even though it's such an amazing story and it's weird and out there, mixing a kind of modern day life with a fantasy realm and a lot of fun, you're going to have to still wait for more books to come out. But you can go to his YouTube channel, 21st Century Writer, sign up on his author page, and you will get the book for free as an ebook that you can download. Bewilderness is great. And then in April, we had a tie with Project Hail Mary and The Shadow of the Gods. Those were some of the best science fiction and fantasy books that I have read in a long, long time. Project Hail Mary, which I thought to myself, there's no way this book could be as good as The Martian. But my goodness, Andy Weir, the author, did a spectacular job with it. And then with The Shadow of the Gods, that was my first book to read by John Gwynne, and I'm really glad I did. I don't care that I have to wait for more books to come out in the series. The characters were amazing, the situations were powerful, and that cover, wow, that's such a good cover. Then in May, I read the prequel to Sea of Rust. It's Day Zero. And I often think with prequels that I go in with low expectations because I'm afraid it can't live up to the original book. This really was spectacular. This is science fiction with robots rising up against humanity. But there's a nanny robot that doesn't want to kill the child it's in charge of taking care of. And so there's this huge conflict of, does it join in with its fellow robots to save itself, or does the robot try and save the human kid? It's very heart-touching. Really enjoyed it. In June, I read Margaret Penard's Remnants trilogy with The Grasping Roots. That was my favorite book from that series. And then I also read Darkest Hours. It's a Mike Thorne book, collection of short stories. They tied for the best read of the month. They are both spectacular. If you like historical fiction, I highly recommend Margaret Penard's Remnants trilogy. The Grasping Root is the middle book in the trilogy, but it's my favorite. Kind of like how Empire Strikes Back is my favorite of the original 3 Star Wars. And Mike Thorne, with his horror stories, he will amaze you with some creepy, weird, and gross stuff. So both of those books deserve to be here, but they're giving me the complication of I know I'm going to have to pick between things. Then in July, I was able to read Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia. She's become one of my favorite authors in the last year, and I really love what she's been writing. Then, that was a crime book. Felt kind of like a Quentin Tarantino movie with the different points of view. Then in August, I was participating in the Book Buffet Marathon, so I read Julia Child's book, My Life in France. And then in September, oh my goodness, I had another amazing month. It's been a great year for reading. Misery by Stephen King blew me away. Annie Wilkes is one of the greatest villains in literature, in horror. Such a powerful villain. Though that month I also read Neal Shusterman's Unwind series, which I listened to as audiobooks, and I absolutely loved them. It was a bizarre concept, which Neal Shusterman does sometimes. But you'll notice Neal Shusterman in 2020 was on my list because of Dry, and he's here for Unwind. In those books, in the future, it's a weird state of society where technology has advanced to where they can take people and take their body parts apart, lack of a better phrasing, their body parts apart, and reconnect them to other people in these weird ways. It's the children are on the run so that they don't get taken to basically have their bodies disassembled and their body parts given to other people. Yeah, creepy, kind of crazy story, but very interesting and exciting as well. Alright, that brings us to October, where I've been reading a lot of Stephen King, and I have to admit, Different Seasons was just really powerful. That's got 4 stories in it, and some of those stories have become powerful films with Apt Pupil, which Apt Pupil really does feel like horror, and it's very psychological. It's got the story that inspired Stand By Me, which is really good, and The Shawshank Redemption. Moving on along, we had The Song of Echoes, which is the first book in an epic fantasy series in November. Really powerful fantasy. I really liked it. The author has sent me the second book, and that brings us to the end of the year, December. I had a tie once again in December. My ties took up all 4 of the wildcard spots, which I'm perfectly fine with. Might as well use the wildcard spots for that. In December, I gave the tie to Served Cold, which is the HorrorTube anthology featuring a lot of people you may know because you might watch their YouTube channels. And David Wiley's book, A Merchant in Oria. It's a fantasy novella. It's a shorter story because it's a novella, but I really loved it. The main character was a flawed protagonist as a merchant, divided between being greedy and selfish, but also wanting to be a good person and do the right thing, which isn't always easy in the real world or in a fantasy setting. That's the year. That's all 16 options. I don't know what your favorite is, what you're rooting for, but here we go. It's decision-making time. I'm not going to allow myself to have a tie at the end. We will pick a definite winner for the best read of 2021. Advancing from preliminaries. Our first battle is back there January against February. I absolutely love the character of Garrick. from Deep Space Nine. But I have to admit, I really chose him in February as kind of a nostalgia callback to the character. I'm going to let the graphic novel from the Blacklist advance above the really fun Deep Space Nine political intrigue novel. And part of that is, it's hard to defeat Raymond Reddington. So as much as it hurts me, I'm sorry, Mr. Garrick, you're getting the loss on this one. Then we look at March and April, The Bewilderness against Project Hail Mary. I think that in this tournament for the brackets, where books fall really makes a big difference, because I don't think it'd be easy for most books to defeat Project Hail Mary, but The Bewilderness can. So the fact that Project Hail Mary is put right here in the bracket unfortunately means it's losing in prelims, and that makes me a little sad because it's such a powerful, amazing science fiction novel. But The Bewilderness deserves to advance. The main character in The Bewilderness is a father, but his kid has died. And the mother of his children, well, his dead child, doesn't want anything to do with him anymore. As you can imagine, they suffered a horrible, traumatic event. But because of the way that the magic fantasy stuff is set up, he believes he might have a chance to change things. And he's putting his life on the line to try and save his family, basically. And to me, that's a heart-touching notion, though it's possible this guy's crazy. It's a fun story with the fantasy elements mixed in with the real-world elements. All right, let's go to May and June. Day Zero against the Grasping Root. Day Zero is so great. It's like Calvin and Hobbes, you know, the old comics, if you like those, with the tiger, imaginary tiger hanging out with the boy. The nanny robot is a Hobbes type of character. You can see on the cover, it's kind of got the tiger look, pouncing on the boy. A very emotional, good story. But you know what? Margaret Penard's The Grasping Root is also a very emotional, good story. I really like the second generation, the characters in this book, what they had to overcome. It's really interesting in literature and somewhat rare to have such a pure character as you have in The Grasping Root. I was really, I'll say, rooting for this character in The Grasping Root. Out of these two books, I'm going to advance The Grasping Root by Margaret Penard. My apologies to Day Zero, C. Robert Cargill. It's a powerful book. I recommend all these books, but not every book can advance. Let's move on to July and August. Velvet Was the Night. Silvia Moreno Garcia is up against a non-fiction memoir from Julia Child, My Life in France. And while I did really enjoy that, and I was fascinated by the fact that Julia Child was in the CIA and did a really amazing job learning all the French cuisine, and a lot of the book was actually about her trying to publish her book, her cookbooks, and so it actually gave insight into the publishing industry as well. Despite all that amazingness, I'm advancing Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia because it was a more enjoyable read with the crime fiction and the mystery. With the main character is living in an apartment and her neighbor asks her to watch her cat, which I can very much understand. I've had to do pet sitting for a lot of people, but her neighbor disappears. What's funny though is this character just wants to return the cat and get paid, and ends up getting caught up in all this criminal stuff and political stuff, international intrigue, and I find that fascinating. Alright, and now for one of the hardest decisions of this entire book battle. Coming from prelims September and October, we've got these two Stephen King books against each other. When I read Misery, it was a little over halfway through the year, and I thought, Misery might be it. This might be the best read of the year, with Annie Wilkes as a villainous character, with the main character trying to survive. It's a thrill ride of a story. Then, the next month, I read Different Seasons, and I couldn't help but think, if there's a book that can knock out Misery in the prelims, this is it, because it's got those 4 different stories in there, and they're just so powerful. With apologies to Misery, which I believe is one of the all-time best books I've read, Misery's getting knocked out in the prelims by Different Seasons. We'll have to see what that means for Different Seasons heading into the next round, I suppose. For November and December, we've got epic fantasy with Song of Echoes against Served Cold, the horror short stories. And I always say it's tough to do these comparisons when you have a complete novel up against a collection of stories. When that happens, I try to think about themes and the characters, as well as the emotions I had while reading, and it's just easier to advance the epic fantasy, the Song of Echoes, to think of it, because the author was able to accomplish exactly what I wanted as a feeling of classic epic fantasy. I loved the setting, the characters, the way that it came together, though I also really enjoy Served Cold, so I feel bad that Served Cold is not advancing in the same respect. The authors in Served Cold wrote really great horror stories, and it does have a lot of good stories. With the wild cards, the first two wild cards, we've got The Shadow of the Gods, some really powerful Viking-inspired fantasy that rises to the level of, I believe, epic fantasy by the end of it. Mild spoiler here, but I mean, you can see it on the cover. There's a giant dragon in the story. And of course, you're not going to have the giant dragon early in the story. It's going to be a huge build-up there at the end. I love Mike Thorne's work, but again, I'm going to give the excuse of looking at these two, it seems easier to give the win to the big, epic fantasy story over the collection of short stories. The Shadow of the Gods is advancing. Better luck to you next year, Mike Thorne. And then the last two wild cards to round out the prelims, we've got Neil Shusterman's book Unwind against David Wiley's A Merchant in Orient, some weird notion sci-fi against a novella that feels like classic fantasy. In the December tournament, A Merchant in Orient knocked out another Neil Shusterman book. So it would be fitting for Neil Shusterman to win against A Merchant in Orient this time, a little back and forth between the authors' books. But that's not what's going to happen. A Merchant in Orient is going to remain undefeated against authors with the last name S, including Neil Shusterman once again. A Merchant in Orient is advancing. We've got our quarterfinals set. It's neat to see which 8 books advanced. Alright, going back to the top of the quarterfinals, we've got the Blacklist graphic novel up against the Bewilderness. As far as looking at them, questioning which one has the better story, which one was more fun for me to read, I'm gonna go with the Bewilderness. Though, that makes me fearful. You always have to be fearful of Raymond Reddington. He's all about vengeance. So let's hope Raymond Reddington doesn't come back to hurt me. The Bewilderness is advancing to semifinals. Next up, we've got The Grasping Root up against Velvet Was the Night. When I look at those two, I enjoyed them both a whole lot. It's historical fiction against crime fiction, which Silvia Moreno Garcia did her historical research, and actually the crime fiction feels very historical. It's obviously fiction with some fictional characters and weird scenarios, but very historical and on point with the politics and what was happening in Mexico at the time. I'm going to give this win to Silvia Moreno Garcia's book, Velvet Was the Night. I think she just out historical fiction Margaret Kennard just a little bit. Alright, the second half of quarterfinals. Stephen King's Different Seasons against Song of Echoes. So here we have a collection of what I feel are basically 4 novellas up against Song of Echoes. And earlier, I let Song of Echoes defeat Served Cold on the notion that there were 20 different short stories. I believe it was 20 in that collection, somewhere around that amount. But this time, I think the power of Stephen King's novellas are going to overpower the epicness of Song of Echoes, and Different Seasons is going to advance. And now we've got our last set for quarterfinals. 2 fantasy stories. One is very powerful, the other one is short, but very interesting and creative. In this case, John Gwynne is going to beat out David Wiley, and Shadow of the Gods is advancing. Just because it just feels more epic. There's just so much more there. Though both are very fun reads. This brings us to quarterfinals. The amazing Final Four for my best read of 2021. I highly recommend all of these books. I suggest you read them if you like the genres that they are in. We've got The Bewilderness up against Velvet Was the Night. At this point, I have to ask, which one was just more fun? Which one had me laughing or enjoying the read more? And for that, I'm going with The Bewilderness by Ben Reeves. It's advancing to finals. There is a circus, carnival situation in that story. The main character works for this bizarre, interesting kind of ringmaster character. People have to make decisions that affect their lives. It's this weird fantasy magic that alters reality. There's a whole lot of fun, interesting things going on with The Bewilderness, and I highly recommend that you check it out if you haven't, as it's getting to finals for my best read of the year. On the other half of the bracket, we've got Different Seasons by Stephen King up against The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, and I feel like I need to pause the video here and take an hour to sit and reflect on how in the world I'm going to make this decision. I love these books. The stories in here are really powerful and amazing. Since I am forcing myself to make a decision, it looks like The Shadow of the Gods is not gonna make it. I'm advancing Different Seasons by Stephen King, and thus putting myself in such a difficult position as I look at The Bewilderness and I look at Different Seasons, and I wonder how I'm going to pick which one of these two books in the finals for my best read of 2021 is the winner. You know, it's possible that on a different day I would make a different decision here, but in looking at these two books and thinking about them overall, I'm gonna have to go with Different Seasons by Stephen King. I love The Bewilderness. It's a great series, but for this one, I think my ultimate variable is gonna be that Stephen King delivered what's basically 4 complete novellas, and that's up against a story that is technically incomplete. You know, the book 1 of this series is really fun and interesting, and book 2 is great too, by the way. I really loved book 2, but I'm still waiting for a conclusion. On that criteria, I'm giving the win to Different Seasons. What a wonderful year it was for my reading, though. I read more books than I've ever read before in a calendar year. I read more books that were 5-star and 4-star reads than I'd ever read before. I had a great time with my reading. So I appreciate that you stuck around for the tournament, and now guess what we get to do? We're adding Different Seasons to the best read of the decade chart. For our best read of the decade, 2020 The Kite Runner, 2021 Different Seasons, and now we can fill in the rest of the decade. I hope that I will still be here on BookTube at the end of 2029 to give you the best read of the decade. Well, that's it for today's video. Hope you had a wonderful time. Please leave me comments down below with your thoughts, what you were rooting for, how you might have decided differently, or you're welcome to recommend books for me to read this year. I did my January TBR in my last video with the December wrap-up, but there's a lot of good things to come here in 2022. Thank you so much. Every day is a good day for a book talk. But you know what? The Lit Show is on Tuesday, so every Tuesday is a good Tuesday for a book talk. Peace.